Gaza Reconstitution, Economic Acceleration and Transformation. And within that document, it says from a demolished Iranian proxy, talking about Hamas and Gaza, to a prosperous, and the language here is quite remarkable, Abrahamic ally. So from a demolished Iranian proxy, speaking of Hamas and Gaza, to a prosperous Abrahamic ally. You can't help but notice the Abrahamic ally component there. And of course, that's dovetailing with the Abraham Accords and the agreement to normalize relations between Israel and some of her Arab neighbors, like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Morocco was in on that, and a couple others. So it's interesting that they're choosing that language.
Welcome to this episode of Zion's Wire, the official podcast of Zion's Hope, where we bring you prophetic insights and biblical discussions with a passion for God, His people, and His plan for planet Earth. I'm Christopher Diaz, and I'm joined today with David Rosenthal.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Dave. So today we're going to jump into some of the current events happening. There's, I think, a lot to update on. A lot has been happening in the past couple weeks, and in the week to come, or the couple weeks to come, we have more things to watch for concerning Gaza and Israel specifically. And so let's just kind of bring our audience up to speed on what's happening and what they can be watching for.
Yeah, well, in Gaza, of course, there's the initiative that was announced by Israel several weeks ago about them going into Gaza City, and which is the largest city within Gaza, and trying to move those people who are there specifically out of Gaza City, moving them to the south to some of these camps that are located in Gaza, set up for humanitarian aid and food distribution. Again, trying to root out Hamas, and this is seemingly like an impossible task because they're just embedded, throughout the population in Gaza. So, but Israel's trying to do that. They're doing it slowly to give the civilians as much opportunity as possible to move out of Gaza City, to move south. It is very clear that Hamas is threatening Palestinians who are living or who are in Gaza City right now not to leave because Hamas wants to use them as human shields against Israel coming in and trying to move the people out. So they're threatening Palestinians not to leave and trying to appeal to them, or even fabricating stories that if you move to the south, it's not safe for you. There's not going to be any place for you. There's no humanitarian aid waiting for you. So scaring the population, Hamas is doing that to its own citizenry.
And speaking on humanitarian aid, I just saw, I don't have it to share today, but I saw an image and some news reports showing Hamas, how they have their grocery store set up and they're selling the humanitarian aid to the civilians.
For their own benefits.
Yeah, they're just pocketing off
so
of
they
those.
confiscate it when it comes in, and then they sell it at higher prices, and then keep it for Hamas and for their purposes.
Yeah.
So it's again a really difficult situation. Hard to know how it's all going to play out in the days ahead, but that's what's going on. And of course, there's the UN meeting that's coming up very soon, and there's a lot of concern there because you've had several countries that have said we're going to arbitrarily recognize a Palestinian state, and that is obviously very worrisome for Israel, because Israel feels like it does not have secure and defendable borders. Especially if you're going back to 1967 lines, so Israel obviously is deeply worried about that, and that poses a major problem. And then Prime Minister Netanyahu and some Israeli officials have said, well, if you're just going to arbitrarily declare a Palestinian state, then we're going to have to look at annexing large portions of the West Bank into Israel proper, kind of as a, saying, look, if you're going to do this, then we're going to have to take a look at annexing as well.
And certainly there's claim to the land. It's Judea and Samaria, but at the same token, they're not pushing that as what they're planning to do. This is in response to, hey, exactly what you said. If you're just going to come out and say, hey, yeah, we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. And interestingly enough, this is actually European nations. This isn't even the Arab League. This isn't Saudi Arabia. This isn't Jordan or any of the surrounding nations that are saying, let's recognize arbitrarily a Palestinian state.
Yeah, it's a lot of European countries. They're not all exclusive European that are saying that, but a lot of them are doing that. And people have to understand, when you say European nations, there's a lot of Islamic influence within those capitals within Europe, and so there's a lot of pressure to bear. First of all, there's a lot of politicians that are Islamic in some of these countries themselves, and then there's a lot of Islamic pressure on the leadership in these nations to say, we don't like what's happening in Israel. They get a lot of flack from some of the population in those countries, and the leaders kind of acquiesce and say, well, we have to put up a united front, and we have to say that, we're in agreement and against Israel, and therefore we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. And some of them just flat out don't know history, don't know whose land it is, don't know the historical precedent. Many do, and they don't care. But there are many who just don't understand what the real issues are and the historical issues that are at play in Israel and in terms of the Palestinians who were there. Most people don't realize that anybody living in what we call today Israel, or in that region, they were, before 1948, before Israel became a modern nation, anybody living there, whether Jews or Arabs, they were Palestinians. That's what they were referred to, as Palestinians. So to make this argument that Palestinians are being pushed out of their land is just a false argument. Yeah. And it's been so ingrained in people and populations around the world, they just keep repeating it. These are not necessarily indigenous people to the area of Gaza, or to the area within Israel. When you talk about Palestinians, they're not indigenous. Most of them their history is related to the Arab-speaking countries, to Arab populations. And when you look at geography and you look at how much land is controlled by the Arab world today, how much is comprised within the Arab world, you say, why are they so obsessed with this tiny little sliver of land called Gaza and of all of Israel, saying we want from the river to the sea, we want Palestine to be free, saying, well, they control and they're entitled to all of it. No Jews allowed.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting with what you're saying there, because yes, indeed, all eyes on Jerusalem, but you mentioned there the growing population actually of Islam in these European nations. So you play that forward, and these are nations that have in the past been predominantly Christian nations, and we're watching the spread of Islam through Europe, these rising numbers, and it's changing the entire demographic, what the nations then in turn support and what they push for. Because this wouldn't have been the case a couple decades ago. And,
absolutely. I mean, you go to the outskirts of Paris, and there are places that are really largely controlled by Muslim people groups who live there. And even for some of the police in these cities, it's kind of no-go zones. Yeah. They're almost self-governed, where they're intimidating a lot of the police and some of the other officials who are over those regions, over those areas. So in Europe, you have a growing Muslim population. They are giving birth to a lot of children, and so the Muslim populations in Europe, it's no secret that they're growing very rapidly. So it's not a surprise then to see why many of these European capitals are siding, if you will, with the Palestinians and against Israel, and that's always kind of been the way things have gone, in large measure against Israel from Europe. But there are pockets, and there have been historical exceptions to that, obviously, who are supportive of Israel within Europe. But In many instances, Europe is antagonistic towards Israel and looks for opportunities to give Israel a black eye or to be antagonistic towards them. And now you have growing Islamic populations in a lot of these European countries.
Really sways things and starts to push things forward in terms of, let's promote the Palestinian state.
Yeah. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with, the UN and what happens and how that all plays out. But it is it's deeply concerning, especially in light of what transpired on the October 7th massacre. And then to see countries now within just a couple of years, less than 2 years, coming back and saying, well, we're going to just arbitrarily recognize a Palestinian state, almost rewarding the terrorism of what Hamas has done. It's a very sad thing to see.
Yeah.
There also, and I want to mention, which I think is significant, there is a new proposal or a prospectus that is floating around Washington, D.C. The Washington Post came out with, you might say, a leaked prospectus or document that is being floated, and they are saying that it's being floated within the halls of the White House. So whether this is an intentional leak to get some of this information out, or it was a true leak, hard to tell at this point. But nonetheless, it is very interesting in terms of what this document says, and it seems to have some consistency with what President Trump said when he was in the White House with Prime Minister Netanyahu many months ago, talking about the future of Gaza. And he talked about a Riviera and some of the things, and that the United States would kind of look over and kind of make sure that this time of transition after the war ends, that Gaza would be free of Hamas and would be able to kind of be redeveloped and for the benefit of everyone in the area.
Right.
So this prospectus or this document that's been leaked is really itemizing a lot of the things and giving more detail to it. And we can kind of talk about some of those things. It's interesting that it's called G.R.E.A.T, and
yes,
it's the Great Trust, right? So it stands for G.R.E.A.T, an acronym: Gaza Reconstitution, Economic Acceleration, and Transformation. That's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
Gaza Reconstitution, Economic Acceleration, and Transformation. And within that document, it says, from a demolished Iranian proxy, talking about Hamas and Gaza, to a prosperous, and the language here is quite remarkable, Abrahamic ally. So from a demolished Iranian proxy, speaking of Hamas and Gaza, to a prosperous Abrahamic ally. You can't help but notice the Abrahamic ally component there. And of course, that's dovetailing with the Abraham Accords and the agreement to normalize relations between Israel and some of her Arab neighbors, like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Morocco was in on that, and a couple others. So it's interesting that they're choosing that language.
I don't know that we've covered this in the previous podcast, but could we pause for just a moment to point out what that connection to Abraham is and why it's so central to this specific region?
Yeah, it's very important. When you mention Abraham, Abraham is the father of the Jewish people. I mean, through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But also Abraham is very important to Arab people because they trace their lineage through Abraham and Ishmael.
Right.
So Abraham is important to both Jewish people and to Arab people.
And this is not necessarily Islam. This is specific to Arabs in this region.
Right. So Arabs and Jewish people. So, and of course, for Christians, we look back to Abraham as the father of the faithful, right? So he's important to all three of those, you could say, monotheistic groups, or really not so much the religious aspect of the Arabs, more of their heritage, but to Christians, to Jewish people, and to Arabs. And what's interesting and important is that Abraham, while he is very important to those three groups, Abraham does not have the same importance or significance to, for instance, people in Iran, ancient Persians,
Right.
who are Persian, not Arab. The same thing for people who are in Turkey. They're Turks, they're not Arabs. So today they share a common religion in Islam, although different sects within Islam. You know, the Iranians are Shia, Saudis and others are Sunni Islam. So very different in that respect, but both Islamic. But the Persians, the Iranians today, and the Turks, they don't revere Abraham the way an Arab person would,
Right.
or a Jewish person would, or a Christian person would today. So when you talk about Abraham Accords, it really is giving a real sense of who's in focus here. Who are we trying to normalize relations with? Well, if you're saying Abraham, it's really between the Jews and the Arabs. And so that's a central component that's very important to understand when you're talking about these things. So when a prospectus is coming out, leaked or not, however it may be, and how accurate it is, or it's just kind of something to kind of get the conversation moving in a specific direction, to get people talking, to gauge reaction. And you're talking about, speaking of Hamas and Gaza, and saying from a demolished Iranian proxy to a prosperous Abrahamic ally, that really is honing in on who's in focus here. And we're talking about the Jewish people, Israel, and we're talking about the Arab nations like Saudi Arabia or Egypt or UAE, as examples. So very interesting. And when it goes on to itemize the amount of public investment, $70 to $100 billion in public investment, but triggering another 35 to 65 billion in private investment in terms of what this initiative would do to reconstruct Gaza, where the U.S. would step in for a period of 10 years to really oversee this reconstruction. And really what this is, when you boil it down, this is the United States overseeing this whole transitional period of time and the development kind of as a third party between, Israel and the Arab states. And it's Israeli technology that would really help put a lot of this in place. And it is Gulf Arab money that would be footing the bill for a lot of this. The United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, very wealthy nations. So they would be putting the money in. As a matter of fact, within this prospectus called the Great Trust, you have massive skylines, 10 new cities that they're proposing within Gaza, developed within these massive projects, developed within this small enclave of Gaza, and then ring roads, for instance, that are surrounding these and running through these 10 city enclaves within Gaza itself. One of them in the prospectus is called MBS Ring Road. MBS stands for Mohammed bin Salman, who is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
Right.
So clearly, whoever's behind the prospectus, whoever is pushing the plan, is specifically appealing, even in the renderings of the skyline, of the types of buildings, they're clearly going after and trying to appeal to the Gulf Arab states in the architecture, in the name Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, intending to say, look at what can be if the Arab states and Israel work together to develop or redevelop all of Gaza. Of course, Gaza is situated on an amazing piece of land in the southern Mediterranean, southeastern Mediterranean, beautiful waterfront area, great climate, close to the Suez Canal. So it's very strategic in terms of what could be done there. And I think what it's important for our viewers to understand is that we live at a time when it's not only nations that are calling the shots on these things. We have global corporations that in some instances are more powerful in many respects than the nations that they may have their headquarters in or that they may operate in. We saw that during COVID, where global corporations really took the lead in many respects, and were as influential as governments were.
Yeah.
And we're living at a time where we're seeing that more and more. And I think that's an example here where you have multinational global corporations, some from the West, some from other places, that are stepping up to say, there's such potential here in what we can do with Gaza, and how we can transform this region for the benefit of the entire area and for the whole world. And part of this proposal, which should not be overlooked, is it is saying that there is going to be an opportunity for Palestinians to choose whether they want to stay or they want to go. And there is incentivization for them to go, up to $5,000 per person for them to depart. They would get 4 years of housing provided for them, a year worth of food provided for them. So, and that's per person. So if you have a family, you know, there's a lot more involved there in benefits. So they're positioning it as a voluntary decision, you know, on the part of the Palestinian people. Of course, there's not a lot of viable alternatives for them where they are now because of the war situation.
Yeah, this is definitely very interesting. And I know when we first heard the Mediterranean Riviera talk, it certainly set off a lot of conversations. I think Egypt jumped forward saying, hey, you know, we can handle this. This is, you know, stay out of it essentially and let us handle what happens there. But clearly that sounds intriguing on a large scale for each of these countries to really say, hey, you know, how can we all benefit from this space while not giving it up?
Yeah, and of course you have some within the Arab world who are very upset at any of this kind of a proposal, and were very upset when President Trump spoke initially about what could happen with Gaza or what the plan was, because they see it as you know, pushing the Palestinians out of their land, which they're not indigenous to that land, but that's how they position it, and saying,
and the people behind all these things know that.
Yeah,
this is so very. Yeah, keep that as part of the notes on the side here. If the people making plans know who's indigenous, who's not.
Yeah, and I go back to this, and this is an often very, very overlooked component, and Americans specifically, you know, in the West, because we live in such a large country, it's hard for us to grasp the condition on the ground in a place like Israel and Gaza, because it is such a small. The geography is so small. We're talking about here. I mean, we're talking about Israel from top to bottom that's about the size of the state of New Jersey. So we're talking about a very small. And then we're talking about considering like Gaza being a small state like Delaware, even smaller, right on your border. And literally for decades, firing rockets indiscriminately into where I grew up, southern New Jersey. So imagine coming across the Delaware River from Delaware, a small state, i.e. if it was Gaza, and rockets indiscriminately coming in to my neighborhood where I lived for decades, by the thousands. And the world hardly said anything.
Right.
And Israel is dealing with this on a regular, ongoing basis. I've been to those places. I've seen those border communities. I've seen the bomb shelters on the playgrounds that children have to live with, sirens going off, where they're literally running, where a mother has to make a choice because she lives close to the border where these rockets are coming in, and she hears a siren going off, and an Israeli mother has to make a decision. I have 3 children on the playground. I have a baby in my arms and 3 children. How do I make sure in the 10 to 20 seconds I have before the rocket may hit, which of my children gets into the bomb shelter on the playground? I mean, this is what Israel has lived with for decades, and the world doesn't even want to talk about it. So when we talk about the massacre that Hamas perpetrated coming across that border into these communities where Israelis live, and what they've already been dealing with for decades and put up with, and now to say that Israel is wrong because Israel said, you know what, enough is enough. We've lived for decades with these rockets coming in, indiscriminately hitting schools and playgrounds and people's homes. And Israel finally said, after this horrible massacre that was perpetrated by Hamas, enough is enough. We can't live with a people group this close to us and living in such a small country. We can't live with this. We have to root out the evil. And that's what Israel is doing.
And it goes, I mean, again, and we've talked about this. People say genocide. They could have completely wiped out Gaza. They could have, in this amount of time, they could have cleared it out already.
Absolutely.
And they haven't. And it screams that this is not what they're doing, that they're not committing genocide. They are trying to root out Hamas and Hamas only. The civilians, the people there can move along and shift, but they need to get Hamas out.
Yeah. Israel, absolutely. Israel is a culture of life. Their people, their leaders, their religious system, all of it is a culture of life. They're not interested in genocide. They're not interested in killing civilians. They go to extreme efforts to protect civilians, even giving up military advantages to the enemy to protect the civilians. They desperately try to do that. Conversely, Palestinians, going all the way back to Yasser Arafat, who was the head of the Palestine Liberation Organization, they would when they moved their headquarters from Jordan to southern Lebanon, to Beirut, this was many years ago, they put their headquarters in the middle of a skyscraper in downtown Beirut, knowing and daring Israel to try to come after them to root them out because civilians would be killed. This is the mentality that Hamas has as well, and that is to use their own people as human shields and to put weapons under people's houses, under schools, under mosques, because they know that if Israel comes after it, there's going to be collateral damage. And then they can scream to the world and the news media just loves to lap it up.
Yeah.
So this is what Israel's facing, and it is a very difficult situation, and they've got to root Hamas out. And I think the people and the leadership have said that enough is enough. We cannot live with this enemy on our border that is doing what they've been doing to our population. Nobody else would put up with that. If we were dealing with that here in the United States, and we had a neighboring city or state close to where we live that was just firing rockets in for decades indiscriminately against our people, there's no way we would put up with that. So why would we expect Israel to do the same? So going back to this proposal, they're seeing in this proposal a thriving Gaza at the crossroads of a new Abrahamic architecture, which again, there's that Abrahamic architecture again. When they say, what's the risk? The risk is Gaza is an Iranian outpost in a moderate part of the region that will threaten IMEC. And here's we have been talking about IMEC, the India, Middle East Economic European Corridor. And it will threaten the Abrahamic architecture and undermine any future Palestinian self-governance. The point of this is that to right the ship, to basically not just right the ship, create a new Gaza where you have people who are moderate, who don't have the same ideology of Israel's destruction, to live and thrive and grow, and to have Palestinian self-governance. There's an opportunity there, just as there's been an opportunity in the West Bank for Palestinians too. But they continue to live by an ideology that says we cannot tolerate the existence of Israel, period. If they wanted to live and thrive, they have all kinds of opportunities. And here's another one. But the problem is that within the Palestinian leadership and within many of the people, they're not interested in just living at peace. They don't want Israel at all. They want to expel Israel. Israel to many within Islam is like a bone that's caught in their throat that they can't extricate, they can't cough out. And Israel continues to be the problem for them. The very fact that Israel is in existence is problematic for many within the Islamic world.
No other reason than hatred, just straight hatred. Because we look across, we've been to the UAE, and you look at how they're taking advantage of what's available to them, building up beautiful cities. And so I'm thinking Gaza ends up becoming something like that, where it's
and that's what they're appealing to.
Yeah,
they're in these proposals. They're appealing to. They're saying, look at the UAE, look at United Arab Emirates, look at Dubai, look at Abu Dhabi, the city, the skyline, how they're thriving. Look at Riyadh in Saudi Arabia and some of the other cities that Saudi Arabia is developing, and they're saying, look, Gaza can be that.
Right, and they promote in those areas. They're promoting tolerance and no extremism of any kind.
Yeah.
Now that comes obviously with another flip of the coin, but to at least get to that space and time where they can have that form of peace.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely where it goes, right?
So they continue on and they say, what's the opportunity? They're identifying in this great trust plan. Gaza is a regional trade hub at the crossroads, and listen to this, of the ancient sea route from Egypt to Gaza to Babylon, which is in modern-day Iraq. So that ancient sea route, and it was also on the ancient incense route from India through Yemen all the way to the southern end of the Red Sea, up through Arabia and through Gaza and then on to Europe. So they're appealing to the ancient history of the region as well and the significance of Gaza. And they're weaving this now into IMEC. And IMEC, once again, is the India, Middle Eastern, European Economic Corridor, a very important trade route proposed by the United States, embraced by Europe and by the West, that would undermine or be a rival to what China is doing through Iran and Russia and the trade routes that they've established and are continuing to establish. This is an important one to the United States and to Europe called IMEC. And they're saying that Gaza can be an integral part of that IMEC trade route from India to Europe, that Gaza can play a very important role in that. And so they're seeing that as a bridge. The IMEC bridge can also be significant in helping Gaza to rebuild and become a vibrant and important part of the international trade route as well. So when you look at this, and this is a struggle, when you look at this from a secular perspective, you look at this, for instance, if you're President Trump or business people in the world, I think the strategy that they have is to say other things have been tried. We've tried to achieve peace in former administrations, as long as we can remember. These battle lines have been drawn, and they've been in existence for thousands of years between these people groups. How do we try to once and for all solve this? So if you're coming at it from a secular leader's perspective, you say economics, you say trade, you say commerce, you say shared benefits. And that, I think, is really the strategy here. It's to say, we have the power now, we have the resources through these Gulf countries like UAE, we have the pattern of peace through the Abraham Accord that was signed and the normalization between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and how it's working, and the mutual benefits that are accruing to both nations and the travel and the trade between the countries. They're both benefiting significantly. And I think President Trump wants to build on that. And he's got other leaders who are on board and saying, look, if we can solve this issue, we can solve it through the implementation of a shared beneficial economic strategy so that these nations along these routes can all benefit together. And there's a lot of money to be made. So there's a lot of financial, implications in this. But if everybody has a mutually shared benefit, from India, who produces these goods at low cost, to the UAE, who becomes a very significant trade port on the Persian Gulf, beyond what it is now. Saudi Arabia, because of its geography, it's the shortest route from the Persian Gulf to Europe. And Israel, which is sitting in an amazingly good geographic position on the Mediterranean Sea, and then on to Europe. So if we can integrate these countries economically, telecommunications and trade and trains and so many other components that would play into it, Gaza can be a significant component of that as another large port going off to Europe and to the West. So that's the vision. Obviously, there's so many other components that play into it from a biblical perspective and in looking at individuals. And clearly, there's people suffer during war. I don't care which side you're on. War is an ugly thing, and there are people who are suffering. There are innocent people who are suffering, and nobody wants to see that happen. But the reality is that some global leaders are looking at this from a macro perspective to say, how can we solve this for the greater good of humanity? And I think they see that being accomplished through a vision like the Great Trust, which is saying we're going to really start over and we're going to implement these strategies for the greater good of the entire region and the
Right.
world. Whether that turns out to be a good thing or not a
Right.
good thing remains to be seen. But that's the perspective.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and certainly notable that they would offer Palestinians to stay and find a way of life in this. I can't help but think of eminent domain.
Mm-hmm.
And you think, hey, we're going to take this area, and there's benefits. Yes, this area is, people are arguing about this. But if we do this and everybody benefits, we can really localize this and make it real personable. Oh, well, now I can get over there. Okay, sure, let's do this. Yeah.
How they would implement this for people who are staying? I mean, clearly, it would be a very difficult.
Yeah,
it's a difficult proposition.
Exactly.
To say we're going to house you in a humane way within portions of Gaza, but still be reconstructing at the same time. It really would be a difficult task to see happen. So how they pull it off, if they do it, it'll be interesting to see how it develops and how they can do it.
But all of this still points to, we always talk about how this relates to the Bible and the things to come. And this clearly is just one more indicator in the land itself that says, hey, these things are moving this way. You mentioned even the names that are mentioned in there, Babylon and things like that, and we see what's coming. It's I just see flags waving. Watch these signs that are developing and where the region's going, because it's all central to Israel, central to Jerusalem, because these things are going to come up again in conversation.
Yeah, and again, this is maybe it is a conversation, a big conversation for another day. But when I see these things, you see the renderings, and again, when you see a rendering, it doesn't mean that it's ever going to get built. But when you see the pictures and you see the proposals, and they're intended to make you say, "Wow!"
Yeah.
When you see them, and some of these renderings are remarkable.
Yeah,
to think that
people start to
Gaza
think.
could be in the rubble that it's in now and become something far different and very impressive. But we've seen what's happened in the UAE. We've seen these cities that have risen from the sands of the desert, and are some of the biggest global cities in the world in terms of their skyline and their significance. So it's possible, but you see those things and you see those renderings, and you scratch your head and you say, how could it ever become that? But if it does become that, and you see what Saudi Arabia is doing in Neom on the Red Sea, and the development of those amazing structures that they're creating and cities that they're creating of the future, you see all those things, and you do see how some of the things that the Bible is talking about, particularly like in Revelation 17 and 18, it does give you pause when you see some of these proposals and you see what's happening, to say, could this be what the Bible is referring to when it's talking about Mystery Babylon, a system of wealth and prosperity, and on the seacoast, and the entire prophecy that's given in Scripture, the things that we're seeing in Arabia, the things that like Neom and developments potentially like what we're seeing in Gaza, gives you pause, or it should, if you're a student of Scripture, to say, are we seeing these components coming into place exactly the way the Bible describes them? And I'm watching very carefully, because I think that some of these developments do have prophetic implications. And I do think, for instance, the trade route, the IMEC trade route, I think that has great significance for the future of the whole region. And look, the Bible talks about Matthew chapter 24. The disciples come to the Lord and they say, what shall be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And on the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem, Jesus answered his disciples, and in Matthew 24, he gives the Olivet discourse from the Mount of Olives. And Jesus says there's going to be false Christs. There's going to be war, famine, pestilence, disease, death, great tribulation. And he says, after all these things, then you'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. So he's giving a sequence and a chronological timeline of the events that will be on the earth, that will be witnessed on the earth in the lead up to his second coming. And I can't help but when I look at Iran right now and the water shortage that's there, when I look at Iraq and I see the Euphrates is continuing to diminish in terms of its water flow. I look at projects in Turkey at the sources of the Euphrates and Tigris River, and I see the construction projects, the dams that they're building there to control the waters of the Tigris and Euphrates, and I see the impact in Syria and Iraq and the water flows going lower. And I look at prophecies in the Bible in Revelation chapter 9 and other places about the Euphrates drying up to prepare the way for the kings of the east to come in. When I look at the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Nile River, where it's controlling a lot of the waters that are flowing from Ethiopia into Sudan and into Egypt. And I think about 80 to 90% of Egypt's waters coming from the Nile River, and the Bible prophesies that one day the Nile River is going to dry up. And I see Ethiopia controlling the water flows. So whether the things described in the Bible in terms of the judgments of the Lord coming in the last days, whether they're just instantaneous events that are caused by the word of the Lord going forth and the Euphrates dries up or the Nile dries up or the war or the famine, those kinds of things, whether those happen instantaneously at the word of the Lord at the end of the age, or whether God is using natural means or human means, as he has through all of human history, to accomplish his purposes, and that those things reach their crescendo at those moments when God ordained them to be at the end of the age. Mm-hmm. How that all transpires, we don't know, but it's incumbent on God's people to be looking at these things, to be looking at these geopolitical developments, to be concerned about the people of Gaza, the innocent people, to be concerned about the hostages that are there being held, the Jewish people that are there, to be concerned for the people in Iran who are struggling under a totalitarian or authoritarian regime, ideologically Islamic, that wants to see the destruction of Israel. But there are people who live in those countries who don't subscribe to some of those policies or that way of thinking. And we need to pray for them and for their salvation as well. So all of these things, as a believer, we want to be sober-minded and watchful and look to this region, look to see what's happening. Do we see these things developing and shaping up the way the Bible describes? But above all is to be concerned about people and to pray for their salvation.
Yeah, that's really, really good. You just reminded me, Rabbi I follow, he relates the life of a believer to ships. And he said, we don't want to be the cruise ship where we've gone over here and we're just enjoying life and don't really care about what's happening outside of our space. And we don't want to be the submarine that just dives so deep into the word. Not that diving into the word is bad, but we're so focused and steady that we don't come up for air to see what's going on around us, but to be that tugboat that's in there moving and helping and shifting, and you're part of what's happening because we have a role to play, and we want to be an impact. So absolutely, to be a student, as you said, of the word, and being in a position to apply it, right, and to be about the Lord's work and operating in the Great Commission. So I think that's important to remember during these times, because there are people who are hurting, and there are people who are displaced, and there are people who need hope, who need to be loved on, and that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it's finding that biblical balance between caring deeply for people and for individuals, and knowing that they need a Savior, and to be a witness, a bold witness to the world. But then at the same time also being watchful and sober-minded in terms of looking for Christ's second coming and the events that will lead up to it. Finding that balance is so important for us.
Yeah. I think to our audience, we do a lot of things here with Zion's Hope, and I would invite you to check out our website, www.zionshope.org. There are amazing ways that you can connect. If this resonates with you, the tours that we offer things to actually help you see the Holy Land, to taste and experience places that we've seen and been to, but also opportunities to be a servant and to connect. So check out the website to see ways that this could really impact your life. If you're feeling, hey, you know what, I want to know more about what's going on there in the Middle East. Or hey, you just want to keep following along with us, download the app. So that's where you can get everything related to Zion's Hope. Check out our Zion's Fire magazine and keep following along with us.
Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Zion's Wire, a podcast fueled by a passion for God, His people, and His plan for planet Earth. If you were encouraged by today's episode, share it with a friend and subscribe, or follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Help us reach more people with the message of hope by leaving a 5-star review and download the Zion's Hope app for additional teachings and content. Keep the conversation going with questions or comments. Until next time, keep watching, keep praying, and keep your heart fixed on God's Word.